We're dealing with a very interesting topic, and that is, does one sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? The reason it's so interesting is because this is an area where it's very accepted among Hasidim, not Lubavitch, but other Hasidim, not to dwell in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And it's, of course, a big topic because the Gemara seems to say very clearly that you need to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And the Litvisha, the Lubavitch, Sephardim, we all dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres outside of Israel. And the only people that don't are the Polish Hasidim. All the other groups of Hasidim, they don't seem to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And this is, of course, a big question on what they do. And obviously, they have great Rabbanim of their own, and great, their traditions are obviously very holy. But the question is, how do you reconcile it with what the Gemara says? So we'll be dealing a little with that today. Before we get to that, let's just review a drop. So yesterday's Gemara, we were dealing with the laws of Muktzah, which we've been dealing with for a few days now, and the concept of once a esrog is being used, it becomes Muktzah for those days of Sukkot, to at least either all 7 days, maybe all 8 days, maybe just till the 7th day when you shake the lulav and esrog. But basically, there's a concept of muktzah that it does become prohibited to eat. The concept of sukkah, by sukkah as well, you have the same concept of muktzah. Muktzah also applies to the sukkah, that you wouldn't be allowed to use the wood from the sukkah to use for you want to use as a bonfire. You would not be allowed to. It's muktzah, set aside for the mitzvah. And there as well, we have to figure out when, when is it considered muktzah, and the understanding, in other words, does the 8th day also, is that also included in the sukkah, in the muktzah of the sukkah? Does the sukkah become muktzah also for the 8th day? Because as we saw in the Gemara, that sukkah, the Gemara tried to differentiate between sukkah and lulav, and it said sukkah is used during the Bein Hashmashis period between the 7th day and the 8th day, and therefore, because it's sometimes used during those hours, during those minutes, I should say, which is the twilight zone minutes between the 7th day and the 8th day, and the sukkah sometimes is used then, and becomes muktzah for the 8th day then, because it's being muktzah during the twilight zone of the 8th day, and becomes muktzah for the whole 8th day. And you wouldn't be allowed to use the wood from the sukkah, which basically means the walls, the schach. You wouldn't be allowed to use it to burn for your cooking purposes or for bonfire, whatever else you might want to use it for. Now, the Taisvis has an interesting question. Taisvis asks, he says, if your sukkah is, it's a built-up sukkah, and you want to use the wood for your cooking purposes, so you're going to break the sukkah to use the wood, isn't that going to be a problem of stiras oyel, of breaking, of destroying, and just like there's a prohibition to build, there's a prohibition to destroy. Making a tent, disconnecting a tent, or by or destructing a tent, destroy. So wouldn't that also be a wouldn't that be a prohibition? So why is the Gemara thinking that you're going to use the wood for that? We have a shaila, is it muktzah or not? It's not an issue of muktzah. It's much worse. The problem is that it's whatchamacallit, it's called stiras oil. It's like the prohibition on Shabbos. It's a prohibition of doing work on Shabbos, is breaking apart, taking apart an oil, a tent. And Tosfos answers two answers. Tosfos says, very interesting thing, that if you understand the Gemara a little deeper, what you see is that the muktzah is not only when the item is in use, it's even when it's broken, it's still muktzah. You set it aside for the mitzvah, it stays that way, prohibited until after the holiday. So when you set aside, where did we see that in the Gemara? We saw that if you have an esrog that's nifsala, that's puzzle, that's invalid, it still is prohibited, right? So Tosfos says, so that's the concept here with the sukkah. Even though your sukkah fell down, you're not using it. It's been a few days already, so it fell down. It's still muktzah. It stays muktzah. Do you have a problem of breaking a tent? No, it already is broken. So there are scenarios where you might want to use the wood from your sukkah, and you won't be transgressing the prohibition of taking apart a tent, but you will be transgressing the concept of the muktzah, that it's set aside for a mitzvah, and you're not allowed to take different types of benefit from it, such as burning it for firewood. So that would be that's the first answer that Tosfos gives, that even if it fell during Chol HaMoed, it fell down before the 8th day, you still can't use it on the 8th day. So you're not breaking it. It's already broken. So you're not breaking it, but you have a problem of muktzah. The other thing Tosfos says is, we are really dealing with the noi of the sukkah. When we talk about benefiting from the sukkah, we're not just talking about the sukkah itself, but we're really talking about the noi, the beautifications that are used for the sukkah. Those wouldn't have a problem of a destroying a tent. Now, you could have other issues, but not necessarily. In other words, let's say you have a nice some nice piece of wood that you hang on from the sukkah, so it looks very nice, and you want to now take that and use it for so it's you beautified your sukkah with it. Now you want to use it for firewood. So the thing would be, taking it down is not going to be a problem of breaking a tent, because there's no tent. It's not that's not a tent. That's just a piece of a nice frame or something on the wall or whatever it is. But the issue of the fact that it's set aside for the mitzvah of noi sukkah, beautifying your sukkah, that would be a problem, because not only is the sukkah itself prohibited, you would have a problem. Something that's there for beauty would also be prohibited. Yes, David.
I saw a very interesting scenario where a person had extra esrogim, and he had them as decorations in his sukkah, hanging on the wall. And then his main esrog became puzzle. So he didn't have an esrog. So he had to take down the esrog from the wall, but it was muktzah. But the fact that it was muktzah, which is the rabbanan, and he needed an esrog to bench on, which is the deraisa, that overrode the prohibition of the muktzah of the rabbanan.
So there's two elements of the muktzah. Where did you see that? In your Gemara?
No, I think it was in the Jewish press years ago.
So there's two parts to the muktzah. One part is something set aside for a mitzvah, and getting benefit from it. Then there's another part of muktzah, which has to do with something that is not meant to be touched, or is not meant in on Yontiv and on Shabbos, it would be muktzah. So your scenario would have to really look up. Are they dealing with the issue of the fact that it was hanging from the sukkah, and things that are hanging might be muktzah on Yom Tov because it's it might not be expected to take down and things like that. That would be like a law, the regular Shabbos Yom Tov law of muktzah. And then you have the law of muktzah that it's set aside for a mitzvah, and that would be a different category. I don't know that category would prohibit you from shaking, from using it to shake for lulav with a lulav and esrog. You know what I mean? But maybe the other prohibition. Again, my point is, I'm just trying to clarify the scenario that you're dealing with. We should find out what they were really referring to. In other words, our discussion in our Gemara here is about eating the esrog. It's not about using it for a mitzvah, for shaking. You know what I mean? Where something is muktzah. So that would be interesting to look up. The good thing about the Jewish press is that they have it all online, I think. So you might be able to search it. And then there's you could figure out also there's a few authors that like always write halacha in the Jewish press that you could maybe search through their articles. In fact, yeah, I've had discussions.
This is, I think, maybe decades ago.
Oh,
but
you might find something about it online. Anyway.
But I think the conclusion was that the muktzah is the rabbanon and the mitzvah is the raisa, and therefore it overrode the rabbanon of muktzah, and you were able to use it because the person needed it to bench on.
Right, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. My issue is that I have to see what the poskim say. Would if in other words, if you hung their esrogim, would that be transgressing our type of muktzah? Like, let's say you somehow got around the issue of muktzah on Shabbos or Yom Tov, but would that be a problem if you're just shaking it? We're dealing with eating it, so you're actually consuming the esrog. That's what we're dealing with, because what you're doing is you're not just smelling it and benefiting from it, or doing some other type of muktzah where you're moving it. There it's a different. So again, I'm not 100% sure. I should look it up. Again, it's not so practical, but I don't know anyone else who's hanging esrogim. Esrogim, you get lemons for 50 cents. That maybe you'd hang. A esrogim that cost $75. I don't know who's hanging them on there for the beauty of sukkah. But anyway, it's not so practical.
If the person is harvesting his own esrogim, and they're plentiful, nobody needs these extra.
Yeah, but I would say he's not a good salesman. He should be trying to sell them rather than what's he doing with that extra esrogim?
It was probably a theoretical.
Right. No, but it's a good question.
It was a theoretical. Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. Okay. Anyway, so that's Taisus deals with those issues, and like for example, Taisus's case is burning the wood. You're consuming it. We're not dealing with just shaking, but maybe that would be an issue. I have to look it up again. Let me write it down, because if I don't write it down, looks for esrogim. Okay. Now, the Gemara then dealt with this. We dealt with the using of using on the eighth day using the sukkah, and that the Gemara said you can't benefit, you can't use it for wood, for firewood. Regarding the esrog, that we said is machlekes Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish, right? That's what we've been dealing with, and we also found yesterday two other rabbis that also deal with that. Is it prohibited to benefit from the esrog by eating it on the 8th day of, not only on the 8th day, it was also a question even on the 7th day. Would you be allowed to benefit from the esrog on the 7th day of Shana Rabbah after you did the mitzvah with it? So that we had Rish Lakish said it's permissible, Rabbi Yochanan said it's prohibited, and then we had an opinion of Levi that said even on the 8th day it's prohibited. We dealt with the machlokes Rashi and Tosfos how to understand Levi's view. Levi is very extreme. It's prohibited even on the 8th day, and on that we said, well, Rashi has an understanding that, well, the 8th day is prohibited because the 7th day was prohibited, according to Levi. And not only was the 7th day prohibited, but even the Bein Hashmashos period that leads into the 8th day was also prohibited to benefit from. And why? Because it's part of the 7th day. It's questionable if it's the 7th day. And once it's questionable, it would be considered the 7th day, and you can't use it then, that makes that the 8th day would also be prohibited because the Bein Hashmashos period was prohibited of the 8th day. That makes the whole 8th day prohibited. That would be the reason of Levi, and that was Rashi's understanding. Tosfos had a different understanding. Tosfos said it has to do with a Isser D'Rabbanan, that the rabbis made a prohibition. If Sukkah is going to be prohibited on the 8th day, Esrog also should be prohibited on the 8th day. That would be like a Gzeira, that we're afraid you'll benefit from the sukkah. You use your sukkah for firewood. You might end up using your esrog for to squeeze into your tea, and therefore we better. You might end up if you squeeze your esrog into your tea, you might end up using the sukkah, the firewood from your sukkah. Gzeira, we don't do either. So this way you won't make a mistake. You won't make a mistake and use the sukkah wood, which you're not allowed to. So that would be the Tosfos understanding. We mentioned that according to Rashi, there is one there is a little benefit the way Rashi learns, because this is only a rabbinic issue of this prohibition of muktzah for a mitzvah. And why would we make a gzeira on a gzeira? Why would we be making two gzeiras? It's a little surprising that there's like a double gzeira. There's a double decree, a rabbinic decree, one decree on top of another decree. Number one, that the sukkah you're not allowed to benefit from, and then you say in the esrog we're going to prohibit because you might end up making benefiting from the sukkah. So it's like a decree on a decree. So that maybe is why Rashi wants to learn that it's not because of a gzeira. Because it's prohibited Bein Hashmashos, it becomes prohibited the other. We also dealt with how does the other understanding, the other commentary, not commentaries, the other Tanoi Amiroim. How do the other Amiroim, Rabbi Yochanan, how would he learn to differentiate? Why does he say that just because it's prohibited? He says because it's prohibited on the twilight zone, it's not going to be prohibited on the 8th day. Why not? In Sukkah, we say it is prohibited on the 8th day, and the Gemara tried to answer it. But now that we see that Levi doesn't, so to speak, go for that answer, like what's the real understanding of Rabbi Yochanan's way of differentiating between the Sukkah and the lulav? Once you know Levi, it sort of makes it a little harder to understand what the Gemara's, how you really differentiate between the sukkah and the lulav. The Gemara's implication the Gemara's understanding was that sukkah is you might have a meal at that time, but the thing is that the only reason you're really eating in the sukkah is because it might be the 7th day. So really, you're doing the same thing with lulav. That that even though lulav is going to be prohibited to use, to touch, to move, you're not allowed to. The lulav is really considered an item of a mitzvah. I shouldn't say to touch and to move. It's muktzah for the mitzvah, even during the twilight zone. So why is that not going to prohibit it for the next day? And the answer is because it's really only prohibited because on the side that it's the seventh day. That's why it's prohibited. But really, in essence, it's not essentially prohibited now. It's only based on a maybe that it's considered the seventh day, but itself on its own right, on its own you don't say it's really prohibited. It's based on the fact that it could be considered the seventh day. It might be at this point it might be considered the seventh day, and because we don't know, we're prohibiting it. But intrinsically, it's not prohibited. Essentially, the esrog is not prohibited now, but then you could say, well, the sukkah also. The sukkah is really, we're talking about in Eretz Yisrael on the night of Shmini Atzeres, before it gets dark, before it's fully dark. So that night, that time period, that twilight zone, you have to eat in the sukkah. Why? Because it might be the seventh day. So it's also, it's not intrinsically that you're obligated to eat in the sukkah. It's only because it might be the seventh day. So then once you start explaining it that way, it's hard to differentiate between these two things. And the Gemara's point seems to be the fact that it's not so practical that you're going to use the lulav at that time, even though it's prohibited. But because the sukkah you're actually using, in other words, the lulav you're not really using, so it's all theoretical. The sukkah you're actually using as a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah at that time, that makes it that even though it's not prohibited because of itself, and it's only because it might be the seventh day, but the fact that you're using it for the mitzvah now, it's iskatsoi for the whole next day. The whole eighth day becomes prohibited because you're using it for the mitzvah now during the Bein Hashmashas period. It's actually being used. That usage makes it that we don't care what the reason is, that it's because the seventh day, it's considered the seventh day. It's not. That doesn't make a difference. The fact that it's being used for the mitzvah, that gives it its prohibition to be considered iskatsoi for the whole next day. The lulav is not going to be used. It's all theoretical. And the theoretical element of it is all about, it might be the seventh day, it might be the seventh day, it might be that day. No, it's not going to be prohibited the next day, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. Then the Gemara said, we have 2 days. We dwell in Chutz La'aretz, and we have 2 days. So what's the law of the esrog? How do we deal with the esrog in our scenario? So Abaye says the eighth day might be considered the seventh day, which is the whole Sukkot was always that question. The first day the first day of Sukkot is either the first day that we celebrate, or the second day might be the first day. So everything is like a suffix. The first day of Sukkot might really be the day before Sukkot. So the eighth day might really be the seventh day. And so therefore, since the eighth day might really be the seventh day, so therefore we have to be, of course, strict on the eighth day, right? The question would be, what about the ninth day? So Abaye says, well, we got to be extra strict because each day might be the day before. So in Eretz Yisrael, we said, is the three-way machlokes. The seventh day is prohibited, either the whole day or only after you shake only until you shake it. Then the eighth day, only according to Levi, is prohibited. Now, what about us in the Chutz La'aretz? So in Chutz La'aretz, so our eighth day might be the seventh day. So Abaye says, so what did Abaye say? Shmini Sabik Shvi Aser. The eighth day is going to be prohibited to eat the esrog because it might be the seventh day. The ninth day is a suffix Shmini. It might be the eighth day. There it's going to be permissible. You're going to be allowed to eat it on Simchas Torah. Now, Meremar says even the eighth day, you should be allowed to eat the esrog. Why? Because we don't actually use it. We don't actually do the mitzvah with it. So in other words, theoretically, it might be Hoshana Rabbah. So according to Abaye, well, then it's considered that it's prohibited for 7 days. The mitzvah of Sukkah is 7 days. We're not sure what day is which, so you can't benefit from it. You can't eat it on the 8th day in Chutz La'aretz. Comes along Meremar and says no. The 8th day you're allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat it in Chutz La'aretz, and it's just like Eretz Yisrael. And we're not going to make an extra chumrah, because the fact is that you don't actually shake lulav. Okay. The Gemara on the bottom, it said in Surah, the bottom 5 lines of the Gemara on 46b, it mentioned that in Surah they would do like Meremar, and they were lenient on the Shmini Atzeres. Surah was in Bavel and Babylon, so it's Chutz La'aretz, and then it says Rav Shisha Berei de Rav Idi did like Abaye, he was machmir. The halacha follows Abaye. The halacha, interesting that the halacha follows Abaye. It's an interesting thought, understanding of why should it be prohibited on the 8th day, which is a suffix shvi'i. Why should it be prohibited? What would the reason be? What's the real understanding of Abaye? It sounds so surprising. You're not allowed to eat it on the 8th day. If it was in Israel, you'd for sure be allowed to eat it on the 8th day, at least according to the way Abaye holds. But here in Chutz La'aretz, because the 8th day might be the 7th day, we're prohibiting it because you really should be shaking the lulav, but we don't. The Isser stays in its place. So what is the meaning of that? So Rashi over here says, do we consider it? No, that he's not curious. But what does Rashi say? Asura b'shvi, materis b'shmini. In Israel, it's prohibited on the 7th day. It's permissible on the 8th day in Israel. And this is what it asks, that we that have this, the 8th day, that we, the Islan b'shmini trei yomi hechi avdinon, we have for Shmini Atzeres, we have 2 days of the holiday. Miosrina la b'yem akama misham savik shvi. Do we prohibit it on the the first day of the end of Yom Tov, the first day of the last days of Yom Tov? We prohibit it because it might be considered 7th day. What do you mean? We don't shake it. So Taisus over here says that it's also here is about Gzeira. Why would we prohibit it on the 8th day? Because a Gzeira that you might end up benefiting from the Sukkah. So we're going to prohibit you to benefit from the Esrog. Now, Tosfos is bothered with the big question here. He says, okay, so the reason is going to be a Gzeira. So what does Rabbi Yochanan think about the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan? Tosfos says, Rabbi Yochanan holds. Let's think about this now. So we've got the lulav in Esrog. Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? Don't eat that Esrog on Hoshana Rabbah. Why? You did the mitzvah already. You finished using it. Nope, don't use it. Don't eat it now. Wait till tomorrow. Wait till tonight, late tonight. Shmini Atzeres, you're going to have your esrog. Eat it. Today, don't. Why? It's muktzah. Okay. It's muktzah. Tomorrow, it's not muktzah. Sukkah is going to be muktzah tomorrow. Now, the way Levi understood it is they're both muktzah tomorrow. But the way Rabbi Yochanan holds, no. Lulav is not going to be muktzah tomorrow. Lulav and esrog is permissible. Sukkah is going to be prohibited tomorrow. Now the Gemara talks about chutz la'aretz. What is Rabbi Yochanan going to hold in chutz la'aretz? Shmini, according to Abaye, Shmini, the 8th day, is going to be prohibited to eat the esrog. Of course, it sounds a little strange. Why can't I eat the esrog on the 8th day in chutz la'aretz? Because it's a suffix that it might be Hoshana Rabbah today. Shmini Atzeres might really be Hoshana Rabbah because we might be a day off. At least in the olden days, or at least when they did when they did the testimony to make sure what day it was, there was always a question of what day. It might have been a day off. You might be a day, there might be really a day before. Fine. So what are you going to say? In Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, you can't eat the esrog on Shmini Atzeres. Now, we said that sounds a little strange. Why shouldn't you eat it on Shmini Atzeres? I'm not shaking it. I'm not using it for a mitzvah today. Oh, it might be Hoshana Rabbah. Well, that's very nice, but I'm not using it for a mitzvah. It's beautiful, beautiful. It might be Hoshana Rabbah, okay, but I'm not going to be using the esrog. I can't use it. I'm not shaking it. So you're going to tell me it's a mitzvah? So Taisa says, no, that's not the reason. The reason is it's a gzeira for sukkah. If I eat the esrog, I might end up burning the wood from the sukkah. So Taisa says, well, then what about in Eretz Yisrael? Why am I not worried then? In Eretz Yisrael, you told me I'm allowed to eat the esrog on Shmini Atzeres. I can't use the wood for the sukkah, but I can eat the esrog. Again, this is not Levi's opinion. This is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. I'm allowed to eat the esrog. I'm not allowed to use the wood of the sukkah. Gzeira? No gzeira. Oh, chutz la'aretz? Gzeira. I'm not allowed to eat the esrog. I'm not allowed to use the sukkah. Why? A gzeira. This is a gzeira d'Rabbanan. Why in Israel don't I have a gzeira? So Tosfos says, the Eretz Yisrael, the leka sveika like gozer atu sukkah. In Eretz Yisrael, they didn't make a gzeira for sukkah. But Bavel, dika sveika, abagab delay mavarach, but gozer atu sukkah. They did make a gzeira. What's the reason? So it sounds, Tosfos doesn't explain. What's the reason? Why over here did they make a gzeira and there? Why would they make a gzeira in chutz la'aretz?
I would. It's a question. Can we get more grade? You're supposed to have some.
Why didn't they make a gzeira in chutz la'aretz? Why did they make a gzeira in chutz la'aretz? So the Aruch Laner asks this question, like, what's the understanding? It's an interesting question here. So the Ran has an answer. He says, if we allow you to eat the esrog on Shmini Atzeres, you know what you're going to end up doing? You're not going to sit in the sukkah because you're going to say, oh, it's definitely the 8th day. I don't have to sit in the sukkah. So therefore, the esrog, the rabbi said, chutz la'aretz, you can't eat the esrog. In Eretz Yisrael, we're not worried. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no shilas. You're not sitting in the sukkah on the 8th day, and you don't shake the lulav on the 8th day. So we're not worried that you're going to. There's no issue of eating the esrog. Eat the esrog. But outside of Eretz Yisrael, where you're supposed to be sitting in the sukkah, we permit you to eat the esrog. You're going to say, if I can eat the esrog, now I don't need to sit in the sukkah. So that would be the reason why you'd need to, why the shmini, Savik Shvi is usher. That would be the reason why it's usher, according to Abaye. So it gives a different reason. Again, that's a different reason than Taisus, but at least you don't have that shiloh. You don't have the shiloh. Like, what's the difference? Why would it be prohibited? In Eretz Yisrael, according to Taisus, in Eretz Yisrael on the 8th day, we're going to say that we're prohibiting it. We're going to say, no, in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to say that the sukkah is aser, but the lulav is permissible, the esrog is permissible. In chutz la'aretz, we're going to say that it's prohibited. Why are we going to say it's prohibited? So it's like a gzeira. Why are we making a gzeira? Gzeira has to do with the fact that it might be the 7th day. If it was really the 7th day, then it would be prohibited to have the esrog. Like you wouldn't be allowed to eat the esrog. It would be the 7th day. Anyway, okay. This is Taisus's question. It's a strong question. Okay, we're going to continue now. The Gemara mentions that the Gemara mentions this final discussion that we started yesterday of the 8th day. Do you dwell in the sukkah? Do you say the bracha in the sukkah? Do you say Shmini Atzeres in the Kiddush? So again, we're dealing with Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel. And the question is, so what do you do on Shmini Atzeres? In Eretz Yisrael, they don't sit in the sukkah on the 8th day. It's in Chutz La'aretz, where we're not sure if it's the 7th day or the 8th day, or we used to not be sure. So here is where we sit in the sukkah. But the question is, to what extent do we sit in the sukkah? Again, you're not supposed to really sit in the sukkah, but we are supposed to. We're not supposed to because it's really Shmini Atzeres, but we are supposed to because it might not be Shmini Atzeres. It might be considered Hoshana Rabbah. So the Gemara here says, Rabbi Yehuda Bereider Rav Shmuel Bar Shelas, in the name of Rav, the 8th day outside of Israel might be considered Hoshana Rabbah. So we consider it the 7th day regarding the sukkah, but we do consider it the 8th day regarding the brachas, which basically means for benching and for davening. We say Shmini Atzeres. We don't say Sukkos Chag HaSukkos Hazeh. We say Shmini Atzeres Hazeh. One of the most famous questions that Rabbanim get asked is, what happens if someone davens and they, by mistake, on Shmini Atzeres said Chag HaSukkos Hazeh? That's, of course, a very famous question, because a lot of times people make such a mistake because on the one hand, you sort of like feel it's still Sukkot. It's like the 8th day of Sukkot. On the other hand, it's really Shmini Atzeres is really a different holiday. But anyway, bottom line is that the 8th day, Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Shmuel Bar Shelas, in the name of Rav, so let's just say that Rav holds. This is Rav's opinion, that the 8th day outside of Israel, you got to dwell in the sukkah. Regarding sukkah, it's considered like the 7th day. Regarding bracha, meaning the benching and davening and kiddush, it's considered like the 8th day. You got to say Shmini Atzeres, either Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh or Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, however your nusach is. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yochanan says Shmini Lazeh V'Lazeh, that it's considered the 8th day, both regarding the sukkah and regarding brachas. It's considered both. It's called the Shmini Atzeres. Now the question is, so what does Rabbi Yochanan mean? So the Gemara tries to explain what does Rabbi Yochanan mean? Does that mean you don't have to even sit in the sukkah outside of Israel? So the Gemara says, no, of course you have to sit in the sukkah. When do they argue about the bracha? Do you say leishe basukah? If you hold that it's the seventh day regarding sukkah, then you also say a bracha leishe basukah. If you hold that it's the eighth day for both, that means you don't say the bracha leishe basukah. You don't say the bracha leishe basukah. That's the opinion that we learned yesterday. Now comes the next Gemara. So the next Gemara is maybe we did it. We did one more little piece. I'll just start here. Let's just start here. The third line on page 47A, 1, 47A1, or 47A, I should say. And the art scroll is probably A1. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Nekait de Rabbi Yochanan biyadach. Grab this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan in your hand. This is the halacha. All Rabbi Yehuda bar Bizna and all the great people, all the great Gedolei Hadar, great people, Ikalu, they Besukkah B'Shmini, Savak Shmi, they dwelled in the sukkah on the eighth day, which is outside of Israel. And Mesav Abayasi they sat in the sukkah, but they did not say the bracha. So you see, like Rabbi Yochanan, that don't just jump to say the bracha. No, we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, not like Rav. According to Rav, you would say a bracha leisha v'sukkah. Rabbi Yochanan says don't have to consider sit in the sukkah, but even we don't say a bracha for sukkah. It's considered like Shmini Atzeres regarding bracha, and for all the other stuff, it's also Shmini Atzeres. You say Shmini Atzeres in the davening. Don't say a bracha leishe basukah. And so paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, you sit in the sukkah, but don't say a bracha. The Gemara asks, "Demosfira lahu k'man da'amar kivan shabirach yom tevrisha and shubayim mavarach." Maybe we hold that once you say leishe basukah on the first day, maybe that's why they didn't say a bracha. And really, for those of us that hold that you do say a bracha every day, maybe you should say a bracha. Maybe we're not paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe we paskin like Rav. So the Gemara answers, Gemiri de mi'afar asu. We have a understanding, a tradition that these rabbis, that they had come from where their animals were grazing, and they were not dwelling in a sukkah for the original days of sukkahs, and therefore they never said the bracha leishe basukah, and therefore logically they should have said the bracha leishe basukah if they were obligated to say a bracha leishe basukah. Even if you only hold to say it once on the first day here, this would have been the first day, and because they so far this year they didn't do the sukkah mitzvah. And the fact that they didn't say it, we see they're holding paskening like Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so this sounds very nice, that you sit in a sukkah, you don't say a bracha, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan. This is what the common minhag is, the common tradition among Klal Yisrael, except among the Chassidim. That's the first version. Now, the Gemara says a second version, Ika de Amri. And the truth is, the halacha generally follows Ika de Amri. Now let's see what the Ika Amri, there are those that say another version of this discussion, Rabbi Yochanan and Rav. This argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, there's another version that we explain what they hold, because what they said was a little vague. Regarding Sukkah, it's considered Hoshana Rabbah, the eighth day, and regarding Bracha, it's considered Shmini Atzeres. Question was, what is Shmini Atzeres considered? And Rav said that regarding Sukkah, it's considered Hoshana Rabbah. Regarding the brachas, it's considered Shmini Atzeres. And Rabbi Yochanan said it's considered like Shmini Atzeres for both, for Sukkah and for bracha. But we don't know. They didn't explain themselves to what extent Are they talking? Do you say Elisha Sukkah or don't you say Elisha Sukkah? Do you dwell in the Sukkah or don't you dwell in the Sukkah? So here comes the second version. There are those that say, everyone agrees you don't say a bracha. They're arguing if you even dwell in the Sukkah. According to the opinion of Shvi, that it's considered, which is Rab's opinion, it's considered Hashana Rabbah, and Shmini Atzeres, it's really considered like the seventh day for Sukkah. So that would mean you have to dwell in Sukkah. Don't say a bracha, but dwell. According to the opinion, that's the eighth day. Considered the eighth day. This is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion for Sukkah and for bracha. So what does that mean? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, Mesav Nami lo Yasvinan, you don't dwell in the Sukkah. You also don't dwell in it. And then the Gemara concludes, Am Rabbi Yosef, the correct Rabbi Yochanan, biyadach, you should follow Rabbi Yochanan. Demara deshmaitza mani. Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rav Shmuel Bashilas. So you should follow Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yosef says, because he's the Mara, the Shmaitza Mani, who's the one who says, who quotes, who's the source of the opinion of Rav. This is Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rav Shmuel Bashilas. This is Rabbi Yehuda bereid Rav Shmuel Bashilas. V'shmili savik shvi'i levar misukkah Yosef. And even though he quoted Rav, but nevertheless, what did he do himself? He sat outside the sukkah. So therefore, he quoted Rav, but he, according to the understanding, according to his understanding, it seemed like he's saying that Rav holds that you're supposed to dwell in the sukkah, but we know for a fact that he himself used to dwell the bar misukkah Yosef. He dwelled outside the sukkah, so it sounds like you don't need to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And the Gemara's conclusion, v'hilchasam mesav yasvinan bruchi lemevarchinan, the halacha is that you dwell in the sukkah, but you don't say a bracha. Now, you dwell in the sukkah and you don't say a bracha. So the Gemara seems it's just about proving that you should not dwell in the sukkah. And in the end, the last second, it sort of switches. It says, v'hilchasa mesav yasvinan bruchi lemevarchinan. You sit in the sukkah and you don't say the bracha. So now comes the big question of why do the Hasidim, why do they dwell outside the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? Some of them make kiddush in the sukkah, different minhagim, exactly to what extent, but they basically don't dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And that sounds very surprising. The Gemara seems to be very clear. And so there's been a lot of discussion in the commentaries how to explain, trying to explain where this concept, this minhag came from among the Chassidim that don't dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Very surprising. Seems obvious that you should dwell in the sukkah. How did it come about? So in order to answer this question, of course, there have been a number of explanations to it. In other words, the Gemara says the Hilchasa. Gemara says that the halacha is you have to dwell in the sukkah. So one of the well-known explanations is based on a different question here. The question is, why is it? Let's think about this for a second. What do you do on Shmini Atzeres? You dwell in the sukkah, the Gemara says. Don't say Leisha B'Sukkah, but dwell in the sukkah. Why? Because you're outside of Israel. The eighth day could be considered the seventh day. It might be Hoshana Rabbah, and Hoshana Rabbah is 7 days. You're supposed to dwell on sukkah. So dwell in the sukkah even on Shmini Atzeres, because it might be considered like the seventh day because the Sveika D'Yoma, there's a question of what day it is. Dwell in the sukkah. Okay. The only problem is What about shaking lulav and esrog? I didn't shake a lulav. I didn't shake my lulav. I'm not shaking my lulav and esrog, but I'm dwelling in the sukkah. Why is that? Tell you something funny. I was in Cincinnati, and Shmini Atzeres many years ago. So Shmini Atzeres morning, and some guy comes to shul. He brings his lulav and esrog. Now, of course, it sounds funny because you don't shake lulav and esrog, but why should we blame him? What was he supposed to know? You dwell in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Is the 8th day of Sukkot. Why do maybe you should shake lulav and esrog also? Why not? It's a suffix shvi'i. It's a questionable if it's a 7th day. It would sound like sound logical. Should shake lulav and esrog. You're sitting in the Sukkah. You want to tell me don't say a bracha? Okay, don't say a bracha maybe, but we don't say leisha basukah on Shmini Atzeres. Okay, don't say a bracha, but dwell in the Sukkah. Shake lulav and esrog also. So Tosfos says, by lulav, they didn't tell you to shake. Why? Because it's yomtiv. It's muktzah to touch the lulav. And it'll be recognizable that you're doing something that's inappropriate on yomtiv. You're considering it choil. In other words, you're desecrating Shmini Atzeres. You're making it as if this is not the holiday of Shmini Atzeres. But sukkah, it doesn't look so bad that you're dwelling in a sukkah. You're eating out. It might be nice out. It's areva. What's wrong with eating outside? Eating outside is a nice thing. So if you dwell in your sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, it's not a zilzul, and it's not sort of a you're not doing muktzah, and you're not doing anything that's mundane. You're celebrating. You're celebrating outside. If it's a lulav, you say, well, you're not supposed to touch it. So it has a element of muktzah because it's not a typical item to touch, and it's considered like maybe a zilzul, yomtiv. You don't touch other things that aren't aren't vessels, aren't utensils that are used for yomtiv. So this would be inappropriate to touch a lulav and esrog. But sukkah, what's wrong? You want to go outside and celebrate outside. Celebrate yontiv. You want to you can eat your Shabbos meal outside, your yontiv meal outside. So maybe that's the answer to, in other words, what comes out is that if you shake lulav and esrog, it would be like a zilzul for yontiv. It's like disgracing the holiday. If you're sitting in a sukkah, it's not disgracing the holiday. It's a beautiful thing. You're celebrating outside. So therefore, the Chachamim told us that we need to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, but don't shake lulav and esrog on Shmini Atzeres. Okay. What comes out from that? What comes out from that, and this might be the source of the reason why some Hasidim don't eat in the sukkah. What comes out from that is that let's say it's not comfortable outside. If it's not comfortable outside and you're dwelling in the sukkah, maybe that would be a zilzul for yontiv. What are you doing? You're ruining your meal by eating outside. It's freezing. It's raining. Well, raining is a heter, not to you don't have to sit in the sukkah, but it's freezing outside. Why are you hurting you're being mezalzel and yomtiv? If it's nice out, that would be a reason why you really should be dwelling in the sukkah. But whenever it's not comfortable out, you're really not supposed to sit in the sukkah. That's the point. You really shouldn't be sitting in the sukkah because the sukkah is only allowed, you want to be machmir, do this extra stringent, it's only allowed if it's not going to desecrate the yomtiv. It's not going to ruin your yomtiv. This is ruining your yomtiv a little bit. So because of that, maybe that's why the the Chassidim, wherever they dwelled in Poland, and it used to be cold on Sukkot, and it wasn't comfortable to dwell outside. Here in Florida, you don't have this heter, but in the other countries and different countries, it was uncomfortable on Sukkot, and therefore the same reason you don't shake lulav, because it would be mazalzel in the holiday. It would be a contradiction. This is supposed to be Shmini Atzeres, and here you're going and touching things that you shouldn't, that are not holiday items, at least for Shmini Atzeres. And the same thing as the sukkah. You're going and hurting yourself to dwell in the sukkah. It's being mezalzel in the Yom Tov. So that would be an understanding. In other words, what we're really dealing with, if you want to take it a step further and sort of like understand the depth of what's going on here, there's really a contradiction that's happening. On the one hand, you want to fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkot even on Shmini Atzeres, because it's the 8th day, which could be considered the 7th day, because there's always that question of the day. So you want to fulfill the mitzvahs of Sukkot, Shana Rabbah, on this 8th day. But on the other hand, that if you really do that properly, it's somewhat of a contradiction to the fact that this is a different holiday called Shmini Atzeres. So you're contradicting yourself. You're doing something that's implying like it's not the 8th day, it's not the Shmini Atzeres. For example, in your own Kiddush, imagine if you would say Leishev Basukkah. You're standing there holding your cup of wine. You're going to say Kiddush, and you say Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. This is Shmini Atzeres. And then you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher k'sharon tzeisu v'tzivanu leishev basukkah. I'm dwelling in my sukkah. What? You're saying it's a commandment to dwell in your sukkah, and it's Shmini Atzeres. That's a contradiction. How could you make a Kiddush that includes Shmini Atzeres in leishev basukkah? It's almost like imagine if you were in the middle of Kiddush on Rosh Hashanah, and you say Rosh Hashanah, and then you say a leishev basukkah. I mean, that would be a real contradiction. There's no sukkah on Rosh Hashanah, no sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is not a day that's supposed to be a sukkah. You could tell me, okay, fine, here we're sitting in the sukkah because we have an issue, might be considered the 7th day. That's like a side point, but but it's a contradiction if you say it. Don't say those words. Don't say Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh, or Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, whatever your nusach is. Don't say that Shmini Atzeres withholding that cup of wine and then say Leishev Basukkah. That's a real contradiction. So here, that's what we're really dealing with. And so we say with lulav, that's a contradiction to do such a thing. Shake lulav in its Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres. Not only it's a contradiction, that's like a zilzul. It's a minhag choyul. You want to sit in your sukkah? That's okay. You sitting in your sukkah is not a problem. It looks like you're just doing it for enjoyment. But if it's not enjoyable, then what you're doing is really contradictory. You're saying it's Yom Tov, Shmini Atzeres, and you're sitting in a painful area. You're doing something that's not appropriate for Yom Tov. And so this is maybe a little understanding of where they come from and how they understand the heter. And supposedly there have been Hasidic rebbes that would ask their gabbai, they would ask their shamish, their aide, is it cold outside? Oh, it's cold. Okay, we don't have to sit in the sukkah on Shmini. Okay, we can go in. In other words, they brought out this concept of the fact that it's the heter of not dwelling in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres is because it's uncomfortable, and then it would be a contradiction to Yom Tov. It would be a desecration almost of Yom Tov. But anyway, we don't follow this. We don't follow this discussion. We follow what the Gemara says. The common minhag in Klal Yisrael is to follow what the Gemara says. Hilchasa meisav yasvinan. We dwell in the sukkah, but we don't say the bracha of leishev basukkah. Saying the bracha would really be a real contradiction. Well, we dwell in the sukkah, even though it's not so comfortable. We'll still dwell in the sukkah. We're not so concerned about that, about the fact that it looks strange or it's a zilzul In Yom Tov, we dwell in the sukkah. But because you're obligated. You have an obligation to dwell in the sukkah. It's a suffix shvi. You can't that's the obligation. But the fact that some do, maybe this could be a little heter of why they do that. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Zai gesund, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.